Hello everyone! So today I'd like to talk about a show that I have very mixed feelings about. That is American superhero television series The Boys, loosely based on the comic book of the same name. First of all, spoiler alert for The Boys season 1 and 3. Also trigger warning, I will be mentioning SA and talking about rather disturbing sexual content. Now that you have been warned, let me explain what the show is about and introduce some of the characters. The show is basically about a team of vigilantes who try to take down Supes. People with superpowers who constantly abuse their abilities and treat regular human beings as collateral damage in their larger-than-life purposes. Obviously, with a premise like that, the show addresses things such as hubris, ego, especially the male ego, privilege, supremacy, and narcissism. There's honestly so much to say about it, but I'm going to try to keep this as brief and synthetic as possible because otherwise I will get overwhelmed and not get anything done. The Boys is set in a universe pretty similar to our own. The only distinction is that celebrity culture is pretty much replaced with hype around people with extraordinary abilities, Supes, who are presented as glorified superheroes to the general public. These quote-unquote heroes are marketed and to a certain extent controlled by VOD International, a corporation that makes money off Supes through movies, merch, and so on. Behind the tightly controlled and scripted public appearances of these manufactured heroes, however, Supes tend to be extremely corrupt. And this idealized world of fame and influence is revealed to be full of abuse and discrimination. The parallels with celebrity culture in Hollywood is an obvious one, but I do think that the show offers really good criticism in this regard. The most famous superhero team in this universe is known as the Seven. It includes a violent maniac called Homelander, a character who is obsessed with the idea of being adored and recognized as superior to the rest of the human race in every way possible because of a shit ton of unpacked childhood traumas. There's also the Deep, an insecure sexual predator who talks to marine animals. The Seven also features Annie January, aka Starlight, the embodiment of the stereotypical ingenue who dreams of becoming a superhero and has no idea what she's getting herself into. Another female member of the Seven is Queen Maeve, who is older than Starlight and infinitely more disillusioned. We also have Translucent, a bulletproof man who can become invisible and who is also a sexual predator as he likes to become invisible in women's bathroom to spy on them. A much bigger threat to women's safety and privacy than trans women, in my opinion. Bathroom police, if you're listening, you should get on this. There's also A-Train. He has the ability to be incredibly fast. He's basically the Flash. But he is also very insecure about his performance, and he is addicted to a drug called V that basically intensifies his super abilities. Anyway, I probably missed a couple, but the Seven is one of the two groups that the show focuses on. The other big one is the Boys, aka the vigilantes who seek to take down the VOD corporation and its criminal Supes, in particular, the Seven. When the show begins, the audience is sort of introduced to both these groups through the eyes of two newcomers. Starlight, when it comes to the Seven, and Huey Campbell for the Boys. Huey joins the group after A-Train accidentally kills his girlfriend. The Boys also feature Mother's Milk, MM, my personal favorite, Frenchie, whose most distinctive quality is that he is French and sexy because he speaks with a French accent. The only woman in this tiny little circle bursting with testosterone is Kimiko, a Supe who got her powers by basically being experimented on. Last but not least, we have Billy Butcher, who is the leader of the Boys, while Homelander is the leader of the Seven. And while I truly believe that Homelander's character is meant to denounce toxic masculinity by revealing how fragile and plainly ridiculous it is, I cannot help but feel like Billy's character is all about indulging in how attractive and cool this very same toxic masculinity is. Now, at the beginning of the show, this was not my impression at all. Because in my head, I was like, well, this is 2020, or whenever this show came out, so this must be a progressive show. The show clearly understands what toxic masculinity is, #Homelander, and also the show is called The Boys. Therefore, the intent of the show must be to call out the underlying toxicity of models of masculinity, while contrasting it with other, far less toxic models of masculinity, which it will call the Boys, to really send home the idea that masculinity doesn't have to be toxic, and also that you get to be French and sexy and also a murderer, but that doesn't matter because you're French and sexy. But for real, I thought that the show was going to take all these stereotypical male characters and subvert the expected tropes around them. And so I really enjoyed watching the first couple of seasons. I thought it was a great show, and to be honest, I thought it was really progressive as well. I mean, it addressed things like sexual assault, racism, being a woman in a men's world. Honestly, while watching the show, I was never really trying to be critical. Like, I was plainly in entertainment mode. I trusted it. And now that I think about it, as someone who is used to deconstructing gender and analyzing how it's presented and the power of representation, I guess it's a bit surprising of me that I didn't put on my critical glasses while watching a series called The Boys. But again, I really thought the show's intent was to denounce toxic masculinity while indulging a little bit in how fun it all is to see hot men fight each other. And then I watched another Seth Rogen show called Preacher. And I'm not going to do a deep dive on either The Boys or Preacher in this video because, believe me, it would be 4 hours long. But let's just say that the horrendous glorification of toxic masculinity in Preacher made my experience of The Boys as a viewer a lot more difficult to enjoy. Don't get me wrong, I liked Preacher overall, it's a fun show, but there were so many moments when I was like, okay, this show is clearly not as progressive as I want it to be. The main character is clearly just as bad as the other baddies, but he always gets a pass, meaning he's always rewarded, narratively speaking, because while his actions are wrong, he is always acting in the most masculine way possible. And look, I wouldn't necessarily think that the show was using masculinity to excuse his behavior if the villains of the show, and I mean all the villains of the show, weren't constantly made fun of and or punished because of the cracks in their masculinity. In Preacher, the only difference between Jesse and the bad guys are not their actions. Not really. Literally, what I got from it is that what the villains are doing is wrong because they are ridiculous and because they fail to be as manly as Jesse, who does terrible things, but it's framed as okay, if not heroic, because he looks so cool when he does it. And when I say cool, I mean he ticks all the masculinity boxes. Again, for me, the contrast between these characters and how the masculinity is portrayed and the roles they are assigned in the show as either villains or heroes is what leads me to believe that this show glorifies toxic masculinity. And so I finished watching Preacher with those criticisms in mind, and I thought of The Boys again, and I was like, that's kind of Billy though. But at this point, season 3 hadn't come out yet, and I was like, well, I can't tell for sure, so we'll see how season 3 goes. And here we are. Now, as I'm writing the script for this video, I've only watched 4 episodes of season 3. The rest isn't out yet, so I can't comment on that. But from what I've seen, Billy's embodiment of masculinity is becoming just as toxic as Homelander's. Now, that is not really surprising. They were always presented as the other one's double and opposite, and I think that's a very interesting development to show that Billy's character is becoming more and more corrupt. My fear is that this form of toxic masculinity won't be presented as fragile and ludicrous the way Homelander's is, but rather that it will be presented as larger than life. And as I'm writing this video anyway, it has yet to be condemned or called out by the show. I mean, is it dangerous? Of course it is. Huey won't be able to handle it, surely not, but Billy though. It's kind of awesome when he's doing it, isn't it? I'm not saying that this is necessarily the way that the show wants the audience to interpret it, but I think it's fair to say that there's room for ambiguity here. Where I am in the show now, Huey, who was very much presented as a sweet guy throughout the show, is having some massive insecurities about the fact that his girlfriend, Starlight, is a lot stronger than he is. And so he's trying to follow in Billy's footsteps, and that's not going so well for him. Again, he's probably just not man enough. But look, the show isn't over. There's still time for Billy's actions to be condemned by the show. In fact, this may be interpreted as the show calling out toxic masculinity within the good guys circle. MM's character is pretty much doing that already. He's criticizing Billy's actions. And yeah, it's very likely that Billy will become the show's main villain at some point, which would be awesome. So, what the fuck is my problem? I'm not sure I believe the show anymore. I'm not sure I trust this show to represent and criticize gender roles in a smart and progressive way anymore. So now I'm going to tell you the reason why I do not trust this show's message when it comes to representing toxic masculinity, sexism, and anything that has to do with gender and sexual oppression. And that reason is linked to how the show portrays sex. Before we get started on that, however, I'd like to say that I am aware that the show touches on many different societal issues, and I'm not going to get into them. It's not that I want to ignore them, but right now I just want to talk about this very specific aspect, because honestly, it's kind of my area and I feel comfortable talking about it. So yeah, today we're going to talk about sex and how a certain experience of it seems to be validated by the show, while others are, in my opinion, portrayed as deviant and directly associated with or followed by a punishment of some sort. Also, I'm not going to rewatch the show because, in case you hadn't noticed, I really don't want to put any effort into this. So this is just going to be my reaction to watching the first few episodes of season 3, and also what I remember from the other seasons. Also, big trigger warning for this part of the video, I'm going to be discussing graphic sexual content and sexual violence, death. I mean, if you've watched the show, you know what I'm talking about, but it's gonna get very gross very soon. So, let's get into it. I'm watching season 3 with an open mind. I'm excited because I like this show. And first episode in, we get the most disgusting scene I've ever seen in my life. We're at this big soup party. There's a soup there whose superpower is like changing the size of his body, like he can make himself be very, very big or very, very small. He's basically Ant-Man, but also giant man. Is that a thing? Anyways, we follow him into a room with another male character, and then the other guy, the human guy, tells this Ant-Man guy, I want you inside me. And I was like, cool, gay sex, you know? I'm sure the show is going to represent that very respectfully. And then, like, Ant-Man shrinks himself until he's small enough to get into the other man's penis through the, you know. You see him being in the other guy's dick, and they both seem to be enjoying themselves, right? Until Ant-Man sneezes and accidentally blows up the guy that he was inside of. Not just his dick, his whole body, until he is covered in his lover's guts and blood. And pretty gross, right? And in my mind, I was like, hang on. Well, no, actually, in my mind, I was like throwing up, but after I was done, I was like, hang on. Did this show just equate gay sex, like literally the act of gay sex, of a man being inside another man? First of all, with a very specific weird kink, followed by a very graphic and absolutely horrific death scene? And then I thought, well, you're being too hard on this show. Everything about it is gross. It just depicts sex in a crass, violent way, like everything else. But then in the same episode, we get a super cute Huey Starlight sex scene that's all sweet and fun and vanilla with Billy Joel playing in the background. And sure, you may think like, okay, but that's different because Starlight and Huey are in a relationship. Their sex life is not graphic or kinky or gross or immoral. They are emotionally involved with each other. Also, their sex involves a penis into a vagina, and therefore it doesn't have to end into one of them being covered in the other one's guts. See where I'm going with this? And I know you may be thinking, okay, but this is like one instance of gay sex being portrayed like this. And fair enough. I have not rewatched the show, and I cannot remember another depiction of gay sex in the show. They do mention that Maeve is bisexual, but I don't think we actually see her have sex with her girlfriend. And anyways, standards are different for men and women when it comes to homosexuality. I'll tell you what I do remember, though. I remember the vampire in Preacher having to kill his male lover because he was evil and all, and he was going around seducing innocent people, turning them into vampires, leading them into his world of darkness, and then betraying them and killing them. And I remember being really pissed about it. I also remember the show Preacher making fun of a man being raped, you know, because he's a man. So they're ass fucking him, so that's obviously hilarious. Actually, if I think about it, I think the use of sex toys was clearly being vilified as well in Preacher. Anal toys, obviously, because how emasculating to want a woman to penetrate you. But no, I don't remember any more gay sex scenes in The Boys. However, the visual of a man exploding because he was having gay sex with another man reminded me of another deviant sexual act that ended in death and blood. Remember Popclaw? No, me neither. I had to Google A-Train girlfriend name in order to put it in this video. Popclaw is a soup as well as a former Hollywood star. She's known for starring in a rather sexy movie franchise. A-Train, the soup who accidentally killed Huey's girlfriend, and Popclaw are in love. But they cannot go public with their romance because it doesn't fit A-Train's playboy image. Popclaw is characterized by her drug addiction and the fact that she is crazy about a guy who is too ashamed of her to publicly claim her. She's also a very sexualized character, and she happens to be broke. And so at some point her landlord comes to ask about that rent, and she uses her sexuality to sort of make a deal with him. Basically she offers to pay rent with sex. But because she's a bit high on V, the drug that intensifies people's superpowers, she kind of ends up savagely fucking her landlord's face to bits. Again, we have this pattern of superpowers and sex not going so great. But what's interesting about this sex scene is that it's not shown as regular, normal sex, you know, it's not just a man and a woman having sex in a rough but passionate way, or even in a vanilla way. No, weirdly enough, terrible accidents don't happen when this sort of sex happens on screen. This is a woman using her sexuality to get something in return, doing sex work basically. And the act of her getting oral pleasure and having an orgasm literally kills a man. Like, she kills him with her climax. Her orgasm kills him. But yeah, no, this show is all about female empowerment. And you know, I'm almost more disturbed by the fact that the acts that are clearly being punished here are not intentional. Like, they're both accidents. She's riding a man's face, she climaxes, it's so intense that it breaks the guy's face. A man gets inside another man's dick. It is consensual, everyone's having fun, then poof, he sneezes. The guy blows up. It's like the act itself goes wrong without anyone else intervening. This is proper justice from above kind of shit. Like, the act being portrayed on screen is so wrong in itself that karma has to punish them. Hey, you can say I'm overthinking it all you want. What I'm getting from this is that a woman who is using her sexuality for anything other than love or romantic desire in a non-deviant and, more importantly, non-submissive way is being punished. Oh, and also the boys were literally filming her and violating her privacy, but hey, the end justified the means. Gotta fight Homelander and his supremacist, misogynist ideals. But just in case you thought that Pablo hadn't been punished enough for climaxing on the face of a man she doesn't love and who isn't her boyfriend, and also for taking drugs, duh. Do not worry, A-Train comes back and kills her by sticking needles in her arms and making her OD. Oh, but there's more. So in season 3, we're introduced to a character called Crimson Countess. Just think of that name. Think of that name for like a second. Do you think that this character is going to be sexualized or vilified? Actually, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. When you're a woman, these things go together. So, I'm going to call this character Cece because I can only say Crimson Countess without cringing so many times. Cece is the ex-girlfriend of a new supervillain slash weapon called Soldier Boy. And it is heavily implied that Soldier Boy was abusive and that everyone hates him and that he's basically Homelander. So Cece is doing cam work now because, you know, she's an older woman and she has to make a living. How dare she? Anyways, as she is about to use anal beads, yes, anal sex is bad, so we get it, Billy and the boys jump her, tie her up, and literally serve her to her presumably abusive ex-boyfriend as like a gift, so that maybe he'll be more motivated to want to have them kill Homelander. So that's bad. But just because I haven't watched any further episodes, I'm not going to go on and on about how immoral and disgusting that is, just because I like to give the show the benefit of the doubt and assume that the boys will be punished for it, and that it will not be framed as like something that was justifiable. But this does fit the pattern of yet again having a woman who uses her sexuality for personal gains, and who is about to have deviant sex that involves anal toys and, oh my god, show what has anal sex ever done to you? And then, literally, in that same scene, she is caught by the boys, put in her place, one might even say, and then literally killed by her ex. If you are keeping track, you are correct. That is now 3 sexually deviant acts immediately followed or linked to a violent death where the woman or gay man are killed by their partner in a righteous turn of event. And just in case you want another example of a woman's dominant sexuality being vilified or punished, we have Little Nina. Little Nina is a subplot bad guy whose one characteristic is that she talks about sex like all the time. She also likes to touch men inappropriately, but that's not assault because she's a girl, right? And yeah, she's presented as a cartoonishly villainous character. And apart from being a villain, the only thing that we know about her is that she's obsessed with sex and she dresses and acts like a dominatrix. Cool. Also, Kimiko is the female character who I would say is the least sexualized in the show. But in this season, the only time we see her get some action is when she dresses up as a hooker and literally kills a man with a dildo. I think the show is going for edgy and empowering with that scene, but I don't know, at this point, I don't know what to make of this. It's just like all these chaotic acts of violence that I want to believe are random, but it's just too targeted to not hold any relevant meaning at this point. So yeah, I just feel like when I'm watching this show, the type of sex that Huey and Starlight are having is validated. But in direct contrast, every sex act that is deemed deviant by the norms of the show is morally and narratively condemned, punished and or vilified. Again, I haven't rewatched the show, so those are just the examples that are on my mind at the moment. I'm pretty sure I could have found others. In terms of weird sexual moments, I remember Homelander's weird obsession with his boss and mother figure. Like, he wanted to have her milk because she had a baby and they had a weird sexual thing, and he killed her, by the way, so morality is restored. I guess The Boys is a sort of show in which everyone's bad. Like, good guys are bad, but that's okay because bad guys are worse. And look, I get it, I love Peaky Blinders, but I just feel like in this universe, in terms of what makes villains, it doesn't seem to be their toxic masculinity as I first thought, but rather their failure to entirely and perfectly adhere to toxic masculinity norms. Also, in the show, when they're trying to find Soup's weaknesses, it's always a male character, by the way. Whenever they are looking for a weakness, they're always looking at a man. And these weaknesses tend to bear misogynist connotations. Like A-Train's weakness is popclaw. You know, feeling, sentiment, love, a woman. But don't worry, he overcomes that by killing her. Homelander's weakness is his boss slash mother figure slash lover, but he also overcomes that by killing her. Butcher has no weakness because his wife is dead, he loves nothing. But then, oh shit, his wife is alive, but he overcomes this temporary weakness because she dies? Also, since we're talking about the weaknesses of male characters in this show, there's something that I wanted to talk about here. Do you remember Translucent? The guy who can become invisible and his skin is bulletproof? Well, at the beginning of season 1, the boys have him trapped and they're trying to figure out how to kill him. Again, they're looking for, his weakness. Do you remember what his weakness is? I'll give you a clue. What is the one weakness of the male body when it comes to adhering to the norms of toxic masculinity? Yeah, no, it's literally his butt. They kill him by shoving a bomb up his ass. Now, this might be a bit of a stretch, but symbolically, his potential for deviant gay sex was literally his one and only weakness. Look, I'm sorry, if the shoe fits, wear it. Now, I'm almost done, don't worry. But there is one more thing that I would like to talk about, and no, it is not about how the Deep is forced by Homelander to eat the octopus that he was sexually attracted to. I have chosen to repress that scene, and you can make of that what you will. No, I want to talk about how the show touches on sexual assault with the character of Starlight in season 1. So, as I said, Starlight is the newest member of the Seven. She is young and naive, and she is raped by the Deep in the first episode. Now, Huey, who is Starlight's love interest and boyfriend in later seasons, actually meets Starlight right after she's sexually assaulted. She confides in him, and he makes her feel better, and it's a very sweet scene. And then Billy pushes him to use Starlight for information to try and infiltrate the Seven. And he builds an entire relationship with her based on a shit ton of lies. And while this trope is nothing new in TV, the juxtaposition of it with Starlight's sexual assault made me think about this "I'm not who you think I am" trope in a very different way. Now, we do not actually see Starlight and Huey have sex till quite late in season 1. And in my head, I was like, oh, she's gonna find out who he is, and then they're gonna have sex. That's why they're dragging it out. And that's smart, because after the whole SA thing, they did not want Huey to have sex with Starlight while he's also using her and pretending to be someone he's not and lying to her. But no, they have sex before that happens. And whether or not that fits your definition of rape by deception, I personally don't think so, because sex wasn't really Huey's end goal. But the fact that she is a rape survivor, and the fact that he knew this and still did that to her, is horrific to me. And I hate how the show did not have a conversation about that. This wasn't a thing. She's pissed when she finds out that he lied to her, but the sexual assault thing is not brought up, and I really think it should have been. Because if I had just been raped, and I found out that the guy that I was sort of dating and hooking up with and sharing my intimacy with was using me and basically was a different person than he presented himself as, I'd be a little bit triggered. I don't know, the more I watch the show, the more I feel like it's very surface level when it comes to being progressive. Ooh, rape is bad, #me too. Nazis are bad, #Black Lives Matter. Groundbreaking, truly. Ooh, toxic masculinity is bad, but only because you suck at being a man. Here's what real men look like, #Billy. Seriously, I feel like everything Billy does, just like Jesse in Preacher, is just made okay because of how perfectly he embodies masculinity. You can actually be as violent and toxic as you want, as long as your masculinity is flawless. If there's a crack, then your actions are wrong, and you should be punished. So yeah, the more I watch this show, the more I'm starting to feel like this isn't a denunciation of toxic masculinity. This is an ode to toxic masculinity. Maybe I'm wrong, and the rest of the season will prove me wrong. I really hope it does. I really want to like this show. But for me, the way the show represents sex that is in any way perceived as deviant from the heterosexual, vanilla, passionate but rough norm is unforgivable. I also really hate the fact that the only female character who gets any sort of real attention is Starlight. Because although I do like her character, and I don't think that the show is doing a bad job at looking at the female experience through her point of view, it's just such a narrow vision of femininity. Her character is fine, but could we please get more? Because again, Maeve is bisexual, and she's older, and she's way more interesting, but she's barely in this season at all. Also, it's her sleeping with Billy that gets her caught by Homelander in this season. Yet another punishment of a woman having sex. I really liked Kimiko at the beginning. She was a really interesting character, but now I feel like all she does is follow everyone around, and at this point, honestly, the only male character that I still like is Frenchie, and he has nothing to do with the main plot anymore. Milk is okay, I guess. I don't know, maybe they're gonna do something interesting with Huey. Maybe Billy will be punished for his hubris. Maybe the show will argue that masculinity is not enough to excuse any sort of violent and toxic behavior. Even if that's the case, though, it will not be enough to make me forget how the show directly associates quote-unquote deviant sex with death and horror as rightful punishment. So yeah, I'm sure if I had taken the time to rewatch the show, there would be many other instances that I could have thought of where deviant sex is narratively punished. Maybe I would have found some counterexamples as well. Like, I really didn't mean to intentionally overlook anything. This is just what I remember from the show. But yeah, I think this is all I have to say about the representation of sex in The Boys. To sum it up, I would say that, in my opinion, the message of the show seems to be that heteronormative sex is valid in a certain context, like when there's Billy Joel playing in the background, and you're a guy and a girl and you're in love and in a relationship. But anything other than that is just not portrayed in a respectful way. I think I'm just really disappointed because for a show that is famous for like its graphic context and all the taboos that it explores, the message that it conveys when it comes to sex is just very conservative in the end. So that's gonna do it for today. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found this interesting. I know that this was just scratching the surface, but honestly, it's all I had the energy for today. If you think of anything relevant to this discussion that I forgot to mention, please let me know in the comments. Maybe I'll do a follow-up video on The Boys if I want to dive deeper into the subject, or maybe I'll talk about a completely different subject. Maybe one day I'll even do a video on Preacher. But until I feel outraged enough to push it any further, have a good day and bye!